Well, to discuss this further now, we're being joined by author and historian Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley from studios in Washington. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV. Dr. Tarpley, now what is the possible driving force behind such a degree of cruelty in the socio-ethnic context of what's actually happening in Syria?
Well, what we're given as a description here by the Associated Press, which is, of course, the official U.S. establishment view, is that there are, in effect, death squads operating, in this case, in northern Syria, in the Idlib region. The authors seem to indicate 20 death squads with numbers ranging from about 100 or fewer than 100 to slightly more than 1,000. And their job is, as they see it, to go out and kill members of the Syrian military, and they're willing to do that using classic terrorist methods, and they're animated primarily by hatred, hatred of Assad and the Assad family, and then also by religious hatred against Alawites and perhaps others. I would say there are a couple of obvious problems with this story. In other words, this is not the whole truth. This is a limited hangout. The first thing is that we don't hear anything about foreign fighters. We know that there are fighters from Libya, from Saudi Arabia, from Chechnya, from all over the Mediterranean, really all over large parts of the world. People have come there to be parts of this effort. The other side of it is, of course, that this is not informal. This is very formal, and we know that from reading the New York Times yesterday, right? The article by Eric Schmidt, where we find that it is CIA officers operating supposedly from Turkish territory, probably also going into Syria, I would add, to distribute these weapons. And we're told the absurd story that the CIA is there to make sure that the weapons don't get into the hands of al-Qaeda. Well, the Associated Press is not telling us how many members of this particular column, this FOCO, I guess you'd call it, of death squads under al-Shaikh, which is the subject of the article. How many of them are from al-Qaeda? We don't find out. But this is a paramilitary effort organized with the help of somebody like U.S. Ambassador Robert Ford of Syria. So I think there's a deficit in truth, although for the U.S. press this is a step forward. The listeners to this network have known about the CIA officers, especially in the Iskenderun area of Turkey, for I think about 2 months.
Right, so then how do these observations not lead to major reactions from international rights groups that have taken particular interest in what's happening in Syria and have been quite vocal about their opinions?
Well, the International Press Corps, of course, is so corrupt. They refuse to see the violence of the death squads, which is really the primary thing going on. It's certainly the detonator of everything else. The aggressors were the death squads, not the regime. This was also my finding when I was in Syria last November. The other thing I would say is that it is high time that countries of goodwill, like Russia and some others, call things by their names, and instead of simply being on the defensive when it comes to NATO accusing them of intervening, to throw that back with the obvious fact that NATO is supporting, arming, and financing al-Qaeda death squads. That's not just a threat to Syria, that's the whole region and to all of Europe, to everybody in the world, as we've seen in the sad story of the Afghan war of the 1980s, right, which led to the creation of the original al-Qaeda.
Right, so then how do you see this situation progressing, and in what direction do events lead towards, considering this is setting a very dangerous precedent, not just within Syria, but as you mentioned, throughout the region and the whole world as a whole?
The group that we're given to understand in this Associated Press report, it's about 1,000 fighters. Now, 1,000 fighters is about the number of killers that went into Hula and carried out the Hula massacre, burning the hospital and massacring everybody as they came out of the hospital. So that was a false flag event. That was a massacre that was portrayed by the corrupt media as being a war crime of the Assad regime. In fact, it was not. It was primarily, 90% of it was the activity of these death squads. So they tried a false flag, they didn't get that. What we seem to have added today is the attempt at a Gulf of Tonkin incident. That is to say, the story of the Turkish NATO fighter jet supposedly shot down, brought down, or coming down, either in the Mediterranean or on Syrian territory, 2 people on board, their status uncertain, Erdogan of Turkey saying he's looking into it. That could easily flip into an incident, right? Like the famous fake Gulf of Tonkin incident of August 1964 that started the Vietnam War, right? The U.S. government will tell you now, in retrospect, that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never occurred. Too bad if you died in Vietnam. This time, though, it would be Turkey turning to NATO and saying, invoke Article 5, help us, we're under attack by Syria. It's absurd. It looks like, if anything, the Turkish plane is violating Syrian airspace, but that is obviously the grave danger of escalation. At that point, the ball would go back in the Russian court. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to let your only ally in the area be the target of NATO aggression, or will you retaliate in some way? This remains to be seen.
All right, we are just going to have to wait and see how it develops. That was author and historian Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley. They're joining us from studios in Washington. Dr. Tarpley, as always, it's a pleasure having you here on Press TV.